And people often look at Manitoba as a place that they say it's too cold. Like there's no way you can grow year round in Manitoba, right? It's freezing, which is a fair point, and a lot of people think that, but that actually isn't true, and we've proven that now.
Welcome to Greenhouse Success Stories. Tune in every week as we share conversations with growers, operators, and innovators from around the world, providing insight into what's working in their greenhouses. We discuss firsthand experiences and provide insights into how these farms are succeeding and thriving. Special thanks to our title sponsor, Arnois Greenhouse, with your host, founder of Little Greenhouse That Could, Trina Semenchuk.
Okay, hello everyone. I'm Trina from Little Greenhouse That Could, and this is the Greenhouse Success Stories podcast. I'm really looking forward to this interview today. Today we have Cormac Foster. He is the VP of Engineering and Development from Vermilion Growers. So he has a background in biosystems engineering from the University of Manitoba. Funny enough, we actually both have the same education background. Vermilion Growers, it's a local for me, sorry. It's a Manitoban greenhouse. They grow tomatoes, they work with Red Sun Farms, and they are actually the first big commercial fruit and vegetable greenhouse in Manitoba. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation and talking with Cormac Foster here. So thank you, Cormac, for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Trina. I'm really excited to be here today.
Okay, so to get this all started, really for the listeners, Cormac, could you just tell us, this is kind of how we start all of our interviews, but could you just tell us your story on how you got involved with the greenhouse sector? Maybe a bit more about what your role is at Vermilion Growers and how you execute your role.
Yeah, definitely. That's a big thing for me to think about because it's been quite a journey, honestly, that I've been on over the past about 8 years or so. Prior to working at Vermilion Growers, I was doing work in the cold climate, remote northern controlled environment ag space. So this is looking at how do we grow food up north in Canada. That was the area that I was working in prior to this. So it was a little bit of a different scale, different scope. It was more research based at that point and really prototyping for, trying to make something happen in that area. And from that, through a series of very, you could say random or coincidental or providential events, I end up getting connected with Lucky Deschauer. He was the founding member and one of the founders of Vermilion Growers, and him and I connected back in 2017 it was. And from there, we were both excited about what was happening in the space, and we connected, and I actually was the first official employee with Vermilion Growers at that time. And so back in 2017, I think it was November that I started with the company. And from there, really things just took off. And I've gone through an amazing journey over this past 8 years where I've learned a lot. I've met a lot of amazing people. And we've seen our company go through major development from basically an idea that somebody had, a vision that Lucky had. Lucky, Maria, his sister, and Mark Cohan are the three founders of the company. And they had this vision to create something special, to create something unique in Manitoba. It's not new and unique in the world, but it's unique to our area. And so this is something that they had a vision for. They wanted to do something. Lucky, he was thinking, I want to do something that's going to leave an impact. He was thinking about legacy and these types of things. And in doing so, he came across the greenhouse industry. And we do have some greenhouses here in Manitoba in our province, but they're not necessarily to the same scale or technological scope. And also looking at the year-round vegetable production, that's not necessarily happening here. And people often look at Manitoba as a place that they say it's too cold. Like there's no way you can grow year round in Manitoba, right? It's freezing, which is a fair point, and a lot of people think that, but that actually isn't true, and we've proven that now. And so at the time, this was just an idea, and so I got involved with the company, and we started to work through different possibilities and explore what's out there. And one of our early advisors suggested to us to go out and find the best of the best. That was the idea. Seek out the best people in the world. And I think our team really took that to heart. We sought out the best in the industry. We were looking for the best technology, the leading edge equipment. We were looking for consultants and suppliers and people to work with, really to develop a team. We didn't just want to go shopping. We wanted to actually develop a team to work with and build relationships moving into the future, because we have a bigger vision for this. And so that's what we did. And fast forward several years, and now we have it's about a 10-acre growing space up in Dauphin, Manitoba, in the cold, yes, for part of the year. And we're producing tomatoes and shipping them across Canada and across North America. So it's really an amazing success story, and I'm proud and, just honestly humbled and honored to be a part of it. It's been an amazing experience.
Yeah, for those listening, this is once Vermilion growers started getting started and started the construction. I think a lot of people in Manitoba were talking about it because the idea was just so new to us. And it is really inspiring because I do feel like a lot of people here they talk about, what about greenhouses? Why don't we have more greenhouses? But the amount of work that goes into
Yeah.
making a greenhouse vision, not only a reality, but also commercially profitable
Hmm.
here in the freezing cold, like that is a ton of work. And I'm sure there were a ton of challenges and hurdles that you experienced that we'll talk about later, but it's definitely something to be very proud about. So Cormac, maybe talk a bit more about what your role was in bringing this vision to life. What were you doing to help push the needle forward? We've interviewed quite a bit of growers so far and a couple other people, but no one in your role specifically.
Right. Yeah, definitely. In my role, it's an interesting thing because when I first started with the company, like I said, it was very early stages. The founding team had done feasibility studies looking at the financial viability of the project, and that kind of background legwork. So that was already in place. But now moving into the actual technical details of how do we make this happen? How do we actually construct a facility that will work in this area and in this climate? That was a whole animal that had to be tackled, really. So that's something that was really the main focus for me when I started out, as well as learning. I had been in this controlled environment egg space, but not specifically with this type of tech and in this scale. Going from a small, prototype research facilities to actually a large scale 10-acre growing space is a big shift. And so really what I was doing at the time was exploring what exists out there in the world. I did quite a few learning trips, I could call them, which were either to Ontario, the southern Ontario, Leamington, Windsor. That region is a big hub for greenhouses in North America. If any of our listeners out there are familiar with this space, you've probably heard of Leamington, Ontario, because that's a big pocket for greenhouses. So I visited there multiple times, had the opportunity to travel over to the Netherlands, which I would say is one of the worldwide hubs for greenhouses, and meet a lot of amazing people and try to explore, what's even available, what's being done right now, what are the options out there in the space. And it was interesting to me because I, at the time, was reading in National Geographic. I had read an article, and it was an article about the greenhouse industry and which companies, which countries were working in that space and how efficient they were with water use and energy use. And it caught my attention in this article. I don't remember what year this was from. This was a while back. But the Netherlands was being highlighted as growing the most amount of food with the least amount of water when they were comparing to the various countries in that article. So clearly, the Dutch design and the Dutch knowledge and what they have that they're doing in the industry there is efficient, and they knew what they're doing. So we went directly to the source, I would say, and we ended up partnering with quite a few Dutch consultants and suppliers and companies. I spent over a month at one point around that, working in the Netherlands out of an office there, so that I could collaborate with the design teams that were over there. So my work really was focused on the design and then actually trying to see how can we get this design permitted and approved for use in Manitoba. How do we bring this technology that's approved maybe in Europe or in other jurisdictions in North America? How do we bring this now to Manitoba? And how did this work in our area? And then, of course, trying to overcome the climate specific challenges because of how cold it is here and because of our winters. And, people may think of Manitoba as being this cold place. We also have really hot summers. So, as you know, it's a big shift. We can do like a 60-degree shift from plus 30 in the summer to minus 30 in the winter. So, how do you navigate that with a building that you're trying to grow plants inside? So, that's its own challenge versus a more moderate climate. And so all of this was part of my role was navigating this, working with suppliers, working with engineering teams. I've achieved my professional engineering certification now through this whole process, which is an exciting thing for me personally. And
Congratulations.
thank you, thank you. And so, having the opportunity to work with all of these design teams in a very international setting was fascinating, dealing with language barriers and different dynamics of people from all over the world, whether it be the Netherlands, Israel, over across Canada, all over the place. So that dynamic alone, that was something that was an amazing experience for me. So I don't know if that really answers the question, but my role was extremely varied, from presenting and meeting with people and trying to bring our project to the authorities in our region to say, look, this is what we're trying to do. How can we make this happen? It doesn't really fit into the mold of anything that's being done here in Manitoba right now. So how do we do this? Right? So all of those conversations, that was what I was trying to work on.
Right. Well, I think like it sounds like, project management and overall like design lead. Like
Yeah,
you led the whole design of the 10-acre greenhouse. You talked to, all these suppliers, like you said, around the world. And then you project managed that design into the permitting and construction process. So
exactly.
I think, yeah, so I think, design, project management lead, that all makes a lot of sense to me. How, I'm curious, how do you think your engineering schooling prepared you for this role? Like, what did you think the benefits were of getting a biosystems engineering degree for, project managing and designing this greenhouse?
That's a great question, honestly. And it's something that I talk to people about because biosystems engineering is maybe not the first engineering that people think of when you talk about that
Yes.
industry, right? People usually think of civil or mechanical, maybe like aerospace or something, but bioengineering is not typically, something that people think of. And I find that the program that I went through, that we went through at the University of Manitoba, was extremely beneficial because we had a really varied educational background in that program. You learn a bit of
Mhm.
electrical, you learn a bit of programming, you learn a bit of civil and mechanical. Like there's a little touch on a lot of different disciplines, and that was really useful for me. I found there were times when I was working with design teams, sitting in boardrooms with people from around the world and discussing different design aspects for the facility. And I could literally recall and think, oh, I remember I took a course for specifically about this and I didn't know if I would ever use this. And now this is coming up. So I found it quite beneficial, honestly. Kind of the interdisciplinary nature of it was
Mhm.
helpful because in the
Mhm.
role that I've been in, I've had to wear many hats and be able to speak the language of electrical and then also talk about civil and structural and move and navigate between the different disciplines. So I found the program really beneficial, and honestly, communication is a huge part of the job. And I think that's
Yeah.
maybe used to be considered one of the soft skills, but I think that that's such an important skill. And I think that was also something that was helpful from our program.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. Like a lot of the biosystems engineering program was on how do you work in a team? How do you communicate with one another? How do you set, schedules for your projects? And the other thing that I want to say, it's so nice to talk to you about your experience and how you found our program to be beneficial. Because again, yes, it is very unique. But I also think with the biosystems engineering program is you learn all these different disciplines of engineering, but then you apply it to biological
Yeah.
processes. And two of the key classes that we take is plant physiology and biology. So a huge, critique of people in the vertical farm industry or, maybe in the greenhouse industry as well, is that they're too tech based. They're not
Yes,
plant based, or, they don't have that knowledge of, how plant grows. And I do feel like we touch on that in the biosystems engineering program and learning about how plants grow and whatnot. So I also think that is super beneficial to this.
I agree with you. I find it interesting that you bring that up because I've heard in conversations in this industry of multiple times people make that exact critique, that statement of, this is too tech based, or, it's not actually thinking about how does the plant work, because ultimately we're trying to do this very fancy technological work, but ultimately the goal is to get a plant to grow and produce fruit, right?
Hmm.
So, I early on in the project, working with one of our Dutch consultants, they told me that they kind of have a principle, almost like this rule of thumb, where they say, really the idea of greenhouses is to give the plant the best environment to do what it does. And
Hmm.
so if you can create that best environment for the plant to do its thing, that's the end goal. And I agree. I think that that is often missed. It's seen as a venture
Hmm.
capital type thing, or, from the financial perspective or the tech perspective. But yeah, the biological piece is huge.
I guess I ask about this too because your role was, I guess, on the design and project managing of bringing this greenhouse to life. But I'm wondering, like, what was your experience with actually growing crops? Did you grow any crops yourself, or were you working in a team with growing crops as well? And during that process, were there instances where your team was struggling to grow crops? Maybe what were the causes of that and what were some solutions?
Right. Yeah, so I've had my own gardens in the past at my house, but I really haven't done that much growing, really, from that perspective. I've grown my few tomato plants in my backyard, but from the growing perspective, honestly, that's where I rely on the expertise of our head grower and our grow team. So one of the things we
Hmm.
did with that idea of going out and finding the best of the best, the idea is to find people who understand that piece of the industry and bring them to the team. So we actually have
Yes.
a head grower on our staff as part of our team, with a grow team, and so they have that expertise specific to the plants, and how do we drive the plants to get the best output. And so my consultation with that grow team is critical to understand,
Hmm.
okay, if we're making these types of design changes, what impact do you expect to see on the plants and the plant health? And I have an understanding of
Mm.
it. I have that educational background. I have my understanding from my own research and study. But really, I rely on their expertise to then have that dialogue back and forth. And I find that really helpful because I have
Hmm.
some level of understanding, but there's people in the industry who have been doing this for decades. And so we'll
Yeah.
consult and we'll have calls with growers from around the world to say, hey, what have you experienced when you've done this? Have you dealt with this type of situation? And then I can take that back to the technical side and say, okay, how do we work with this now?
So, how did you find your head grower?
That was an interesting process as well that our team worked on, basically trying to seek out and talk with people in the industry and say, hey, do you know somebody? That was really the process. And through contacts and through this relationship that we've developed with people all over the world, you start to have conversations and you start to find out about these people that exist. And really, it's through word of mouth.
Mm, okay. It makes a lot of sense that you were relying on, on that expertise of the growers. But, were there times where you were experiencing challenges with growing tomato crops in your setup? And I'm wondering if those challenges were because of growing tomatoes in like such a cold climate, like were there
Mm,
issues with controlling the climate? Or yeah, could you talk like maybe a bit more about an instance where you're struggling to grow?
sure. Yeah, we've definitely had our challenges, and really specific to the fact that we are where we are, which we knew would happen, right? Because of trying to grow year round in Manitoba. And ideally, our model is set up that we want to be growing a winter crop. So when those typical field vegetables are not necessarily as readily available in the wintertime, we want to have that available out of our facilities so that we can feed the local community with our produce. So that's how we're set up, which means we have to grow in the harshest condition here. And so, yes, there have been challenges. I would say one of the main things that we have had a challenge with and that we're still dealing with is humidity. And so, for,
Mm.
for all the listeners out there who are hearing this, to explain it a little bit, typically in a greenhouse, if you have so much vegetation, so many plants, just to give you an idea, with our first season, we ordered about, I think it was about 55,000 plants that we put inside our space. So just to put it in scale, 55,000 tomato plants were planted in our greenhouse, somewhere around that. And so when you have all those plants, they're producing a large volume of humidity. So it's a very tropical feeling space when you walk into our greenhouse. It's hot, even though it's the middle of winter and it might be minus
I know,
30.
so nice.
Yes, our workers
Yeah.
can come in and walk into like this nice warm space, but it's extremely humid. So if you've been to a
Mhm.
humid place, that's what it feels like. And so you need a way to get rid of that humidity because ultimately, for ideal plant health, you don't want that humidity to stay. You need to evacuate that somehow. In a typical greenhouse in another region, you may just open up your roof vents. The roofs typically have vents that open up and you can release that humidity out of the space. But for us, in the middle of winter, when it's minus 30 and we have a wind chill that brings us down to even colder, your roof vents very possibly are frozen shut. And so,
Mhm.
how do you evacuate that humidity? We actually have a system in the greenhouse that's specifically designed to try and melt the snow and melt the ice that's on the roof and keep that space warm. But when you're dealing with such extremes, we found that that system may not even be enough to actually deal with that. And so, even though it was something that we had considered in the design phase and we had systems in place to try and deal with it, they may not be sufficient or may not be tuned exactly right. And so we've had challenges with humidity in the extremely cold periods of the season. And we've consulted with growers from across Canada to say, well, how have you dealt with this? But, we've talked to a grower, for an example, who says, well, yeah, we deal with this for 3 days out of the season, so we can just make it work. It's only a few days.
Mm.
For us, now it's all of a sudden maybe a couple months that we're dealing with this.
Yeah.
So it's a lot more of a challenge. So how do we address that? And that's something, to be honest, I actually just had a meeting this morning where we're still working on that with some of our consultants and our team. So this is an ongoing thing we're trying to address. And we have some ideas that we're workshopping right now. And we're planning to trial some of these this coming winter with our next season here. So it's still a work in progress. I'll let you know how it goes in the spring.
Yeah, fair enough. Like some massive HRV, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. And you know what? There are companies out there that are installing huge dehumidifiers for full greenhouses. That's something that does happen. But of course, that's cost prohibitive as well. So we've been trying to find a solution that hits that sweet spot of, the financial side as well as how do we mitigate this for plant health and production. So it's an interesting challenge to navigate.
Do you have a direction of where you're leaning towards?
We have a few options. And so one of the things we did when we built our facility, so it's basically like a big square if you look at the
Mhm.
footprint from the sky. And so we have a dividing wall right in the center of the greenhouse, and that allows us to control both sides of the greenhouse
Mhm.
independently. So we can actually, if we want to, we can run experiments where we can try something on one half of the greenhouse and try something
Mhm.
else on the other half and then compare, which allows us
Mhm.
to almost just be a very large research facility in a sense. And
Mhm.
so we're planning to utilize that, and we're likely going to run a couple of trials on either side to see, what works, what doesn't. We have a bunch of ideas that we're still in the process of working on right now to get ready for this coming winter.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, we're going to see what happens. Some of them are, involving reversing airflow, using fan systems, controlling the environment a little bit differently because I'm sure you've probably spoke about it with your other guests, but controlling the environment is obviously a huge part of what we do. So
Yeah.
monitoring with all of our sensors and all of our data collection and controlling the space very, very at a fine level of detail. So that's something we're looking at as well, just using different strategies to try and make that work a little better. Um, but ultimately, we have to get rid of that humidity and somehow do that when our windows might be frozen shut. So
Yeah. Are you using Priva?
we are, yes. Yeah, that is our overall control system for the greenhouse.
Okay. Have you had any issues with heating or your heating system is set up well? I know you have this big hot water storage tank
Yes.
to improve your efficiency, but did you have any struggles with heating the greenhouse or did you have any struggles with cooling the greenhouse?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. With heating, we really didn't, honestly. That's one side where I would say, fortunately, the design has worked out quite well. I'm
Hmm.
happy to say that. And like you mentioned, our hot water storage tank, that's really a critical piece of the infrastructure for us. It is something that's used in other locations, but for us, that really gives us I would say it's a redundancy in a sense, because if
Hmm.
for some reason our heat system, if that supply, for us, we're using natural gas right now. If for some reason our natural gas supply went down and we couldn't actually use that for heating, we need a backup, because in the middle of
Hmm.
winter for us, if your heating goes down for a few hours, you can lose your crop. So
Hmm.
we needed those redundancies in place. And so that heat storage
Hmm.
tank actually gives us quite a significant buffer by storing that hot water in the tank. It's a 3 million liter tank to give you an idea. So we have 3
Hmm.
million liters of hot water stored in that tank. So we can circulate that in the greenhouse to stay warm if we need to. And we use that in an interesting kind of dance where we're heating it and not having to use the boiler as much. So there's a bit of an efficiency there. And so our
Hmm.
heating system, that's worked out quite well, honestly. The opposite end of the spectrum, when we get into the summer months, it gets hot in Manitoba. And so
Hmm.
cooling is definitely a bit more of a challenge, because that's not something that we have actual active cooling built into our space. So we have vents, we have
Hmm.
fans, but there's no active cooling like air conditioning, for example.
Hmm.
And so cooling is definitely more of a challenge. Fortunately, we're usually at the end of our crop cycle come the hotter period of the year here. So
Yeah.
we're tearing out our crop and cleaning and getting ready to replant. So we've set up our cycle that way so it works out okay. But yeah, the greenhouse in the summertime can get very hot here.
Yeah, and just for those listening, to kind of understand how extreme Manitoba's weather can be, there was like a couple of months ago, or during the spring, I think it was a 2 or 3 day period where we had like a 30-degree temperature swing, where one day it was like plus 20, and the next day it was minus 5 degrees Celsius.
Yeah.
So do those days or those weeks ever throw off how the tomatoes are growing and how the environment is controlled for you guys? Or, what do you do to sort of manage those big swings? Because yeah, they are crazy and they do happen, not for a big chunk of the year, but definitely for like a few weeks in the spring.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing to navigate, and that's where our grow team has to really have a good finger on the pulse of what's happening in the environment outside the greenhouse, because you have to make
Hmm.
all the changes and you have to make that in real time. So as
Hmm.
these changes are happening, if you get those swings, you have to react quickly and be able to adjust our controls, adjust the vents, the fans, the heating systems, all of these different parameters to deal with those swings. So yeah, it's something that definitely impacts us. And the grow team, they're the experts at handling that and how to regulate that through those swings.
Okay. Okay. So it's not controlled automatically based on like an ambient temperature humidity sensor. It's just adjusted by the growers.
So there are controls. So the whole thing
Hmm.
can run independently in a sense.
Hmm.
But you're also making changes on the fly based on looking at your plants, seeing what your plant health
Yeah.
is. So yes, there are set points, and the greenhouse will react itself to certain set points and changes. But no, there is a lot of interaction from the grow team, I would say, as well, because our team is regularly monitoring, walking through the facility, looking at the plants, checking the leaves, looking how pollination is going. All of these things are being observed and monitored to then make changes to those types of parameters.
Yeah. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. As the first greenhouse, commercial tomato growing greenhouse in Manitoba, what has it been like to be pioneers in this space? How has that affected your operations?
Oh, that's a big question. That's definitely a big question, because it has been an interesting journey. I would say it's been challenging, it's been fun, it's been rewarding as well, but it's definitely been difficult. Like you say, with us being the first greenhouse of this kind in our region here, there isn't really much precedent set or any precedent set really for how to manage this type of thing. I would say first, going back to the very beginning, there's the financing side, because obviously for any project, financing is key. And we had it was a significant challenge initially trying to get financing, because typically you'd have these conversations with financial institutions and they would say, well, it's not possible to grow year round in Manitoba. Like, you can't do that. It's too cold. It doesn't work. Like, that's not a possible or a feasible business model. And so, we get that response, and doors closed over and over for quite some time. So from the financial side, that was a challenge. Until ultimately we found a partner, which is, BMO, who's been excellent, and they're very active in the greenhouse space across Canada. And so they're familiar with this industry, and that has been hugely beneficial and helpful for us as a company to actually find a financial partner who knows the industry. Because otherwise here locally, we're trying to have this conversation, and people can't necessarily even fathom what a greenhouse is. Until you walk into one and you experience it yourself. I know the first time I did, it honestly blows your mind, because you walk into this space and it feels like it's like Jurassic Park almost. You see these like 50-foot long vines and these like massive stalks of tomato plants. And I remember one time I walked into a cucumber facility early on, and I was talking with the operator there, the grower, and they said, "Oh yeah, we just planted this crop like a few weeks ago." And I'm seeing like full-size cucumbers. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, how is that possible? And they're like, "Oh yeah, like these grew in X number of days." And it's just the type of thing that blows your mind. And so people can't really picture that until you've experienced it. And so, that first piece, the financial piece, was a huge challenge, because, like I said, people say, well, you can't grow year round in Manitoba. It's too cold. So finding a partner that understood that helped, and who was willing to take also a bit of a risk to say, yes, this works in other regions, this works in other climates. We think it can work here. We're going to try that, right? So we really said that this first phase for us is almost like a pilot project to just prove the concept, show that it works. And so I'd say that was one initial challenge. But then moving on from that, once we get into the design phase and actually trying to apply for building permits and get approvals for building, that type of thing, that was a challenge too, because where does a greenhouse fit? A greenhouse is it's agriculture. So it is a farm building per se, but it's not the same as putting up a barn, right? It's very
Exactly. Yeah.
different. The level of technology is so high and so advanced in this facility. It's quite different. I had a conversation with an electrician early on who told me they used to work in the automotive industry, and they were in the automotive industry and then moved into the greenhouse space as an electrician. And they said they found the greenhouse space to be even more advanced than the automotive industry and more complex. And when I heard that, I didn't really believe it. I thought, well, that's I don't know, that's strange. But now I see it, right? The level of control and what you're doing in the space to make that work from an electrical perspective is complex. And so how do you deal with that when you're trying to navigate permitting a building like this? Is it, how do you classify that? So that's a challenge we had. And we had to work with our engineering teams to actually, educate the authorities and also work with the authorities. And fortunately, we have people here who've been willing to work with us and to learn and to figure out how to make this work. But that's definitely a challenge in and of itself. And then another aspect of things is, because we're the first in and really pioneering this, there are certain systems and certain programs and regulations that just aren't set up for a greenhouse in Manitoba. And that's where we're trying to hopefully kind of change the narrative and move things along to make this more of an accessible industry here in the province. So for example, even something like the shift to LED lighting. In the greenhouse industry, we're seeing a major shift to LEDs. It's more efficient. You can actually dial in your spectrum to actually provide the plants with the exact light that they need, depending on what crop you're growing. There's a lot of fascinating stuff happening in the space right now. But that technology is expensive. To be fair, it's expensive. And in other provinces, for example, in Quebec, they have lighting incentive programs for if you're building a new greenhouse and you want to put LED lights in, they have significant incentive dollars available for that, to fund that. Here in Manitoba, we don't have something specifically set up for that yet. So we're trying to work with the different organizations to create these types of programs and to present this and say, hey, we think this could help the industry take off here in our province. How do we make this happen?
Before this interview too, we were talking a bit about Manitoba Hydro and what that's been like too with, regulating how much your electrical bill is month to month.
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So could you talk a bit about that? Because that was
Sure.
that was very interesting.
Yeah, another challenge with being kind of first in the industry here in Manitoba is looking at something even like our billing for our electricity usage. So for us, with our grow lights in place, we are a massive electricity consumer. When we turn on our grow lights, that's a big draw of electricity. And
What draw? How much do you know what the draw is?
so our facility right now, we actually use what we have approved for use is about 7.5 megawatts of electricity. We're drawing a little less than that actually right now with our lights, but that's what we were applying for our first phase. And so
Mhm.
that amount, I don't know the exact number to put that in, to give you a comparison for it, but it's large. That is a
Mhm.
large amount of electricity.
So is that primarily for lights?
That is, yes. So basically, it
Mhm.
takes us only about 1 megawatt or so to run all of our pumps, motors, the warehouse, the packaging, everything. All of that is about 1 megawatt, and
But it's still a
which is
lot.
still a lot. It is.
Yeah.
But then it's about 5 megawatts or so just for our lights for the plants. So it is a massive amount just for our lights. So when we turn those on, that is a big draw. And
Yeah.
so one of the challenges is the way that our utility in Manitoba bills for electricity isn't really set up well for our type of industry because as a greenhouse growing here, we only need the lights when we need to supplement the sun. So in the winter, for example, when you have less sunlight, you need more artificial light from our grow lights versus in the summer when we have lots of solar radiation, you have lots of sunlight, you don't really need the grow lights as much or at all even in certain
Mhm.
periods. So you may have a month where you don't even need to turn on the grow lights at all. But yet the way the billing system is just set up, the way the model has conventionally been for our utility here, we end up getting charged still in that month. So that becomes a challenge from a business perspective because all of a sudden you're now getting charges when you're maybe not even using the lights. You may not even be in a
Mhm.
production phase. You may be in a tear out cleaning phase, getting ready for your next crop. So that's something that we're trying to work with our utility to determine, is there a way we can create a new class, a new rate class where we can be charged differently? So I've explored,
Mhm.
in Ontario, for example, how does it work over there? How are greenhouses billed over there for electricity
Mhm.
to see what other models exist in Canada, for example. And so
Mhm.
that's something that we're working on right now. And so these are some of the things that, you may not think about. They're kind of nitty gritty background things that you may not consider initially, but they have major impacts on the business. And because we're
Yeah,
new,
absolutely.
it's something we're trying to navigate.
Yeah, and that's interesting too because it's like, well, you start off in your role as, designing and project managing this greenhouse, but now a part of your role is you have to change the way that utilities are set up in Manitoba so that your design,
Yes.
can work. So
Yes, it's interesting.
it's definitely like a lot to take on. Has Manitoba Hydro been pretty like open to the idea of creating a new class to build greenhouses separately?
We're still in the early stages of that, and so we've been working with them.
Okay.
We submitted a proposal. We're working with our advisor, who's been great. So yeah, very early stages at the moment, but I'm hoping we'll have some great success on that front to share very soon.
Yeah, and then that really just benefits anyone in Manitoba who wants to start up a commercial greenhouse operation.
Exactly, and that's one of the things that I've been saying a lot. I really push that point when I'm having these conversations. I've said it for years now. Is that like this isn't just for us. This is to try and create the opportunity for this industry here in our province.
Yeah.
Yeah.
to be recognized in Manitoba. Like
Yeah.
we should this should be a bigger thing where we are, that's
Yeah.
more jobs for people. Like we already have the biosystems engineering program,
Yeah.
so I'm sure we could get like a master grower, program started at the U of M too. Like this could be a really good revenue generator for our province.
I totally agree. And because we are a farming ag background community, our province, that really that's in our roots, right? And so this is
Yeah.
just a kind of a newer version of farming and ag. That's what it is. So we have the hydroelectricity, we generate that here in our province. I think the opportunity is great for us to do this. It's really just trying to, bring this to everyone's attention. People don't necessarily know about this industry. So trying to bring awareness. And that's why, I really appreciate you having me on your podcast, because I think what you're doing is great to try and bring awareness to this industry, right? Because it's something that maybe people don't know about as much.
Yeah, thank you, Cormac. Well, at Little Greenhouse That Could, our vision is really to turn Manitoba into a hub for controlled environment
I
agriculture.
love it. Yeah. I love it. That's awesome.
Yeah, we all have to. I think if we all work together here, we can do it. Like it's definitely within our reach, and there's a lot of people who want to, get involved in the industry, but there's just
Yes.
so many questions and so many moving parts. And so I really appreciate, Vermilion Growers for what you guys have done and being successful, because I really do think it opens up possibilities for a lot of different people in our province. And so I guess this actually is a great segue into kind of like our final questions. But what is your vision for the future? What's Vermilion Growers' vision, and what do you personally want to see happen in the future? You guys have done so much already with Vermilion Growers. You've come so far, but Cormac, we've still got a lot to go.
Agreed. Agreed. Yeah, we are just entering our third season of production. We actually just planted here over this past week or so. And so we're starting our third season growing tomatoes across the province. You'll see our tomatoes in stores, which is super exciting. When I go into my local grocery store, I walk into Superstore, for example, and I see our tomatoes sitting there. It's such a proud moment and an exciting feeling to think this is because we've been working on this for the past, 8 years, right?
Yeah.
It's such a
You did
cool thing.
it.
Exactly, right? Like it's so validating to see, like, look, these are our tomatoes right here in store. And honestly, like I'm the guy who's in the grocery store, like taking pictures of tomatoes and like holding them up, and people are like, who's that like weird guy like who's interested in these tomatoes? But that's what I do, right? And so yeah, like
I do the same thing with lettuce right
hey,
now.
exactly. You understand. So yeah, like we've come a long way, obviously, but like you say, we have a big vision. So this is really just the start. I mentioned that we call this first phase like our pilot project, even though yes, it's like a 10-acre growing area. It's about a 12-acre facility overall, but that's really just a pilot project for us. We see this as the first step of our expansion, and we'd really like to grow. We have plans on the particular site that we've started in Dauphin to grow to 70 acres of production. That's
Wow.
our goal on that site. And then from there, that's just the start, really. We'd like to see Vermilion growers continue to grow in Manitoba. And then as well, beyond us, we'd like to see more greenhouses pop up around the province, right? That's the idea, is that by pioneering and making changes from the permitting side, the building code side, with different incentive programs, and like we talked about, utility billing, all of these types of things that we've been working on for years. We're hoping that that's just laying the groundwork, the foundation for the industry here in Manitoba. And it's really cool because I've had the opportunity to speak at conferences and different events, and the excitement from people as they hear about what we're doing and learn about the greenhouse industry. It's infectious. People get so excited and interested because it's, where does our food come from? This is something that
Yeah.
we talk about, and from the very beginning, looking at food sovereignty, food security. These are things that, are being talked about more. We went through COVID-19 as a nation, as a world, and that became something that people recognized and realized when all of a sudden there was food missing on our shelves in the store, right? So
Mhm.
these types of real world experiences that people have had, food is now becoming a bigger topic of, where do we get it,
Yeah.
right? Even looking at the political climate right now with tariffs, et cetera, there are questions of, where does our food come from, transportation, all of this. And then, of
Mhm.
course, from an environmental perspective. So the ability to grow locally in a region and produce food locally for that community is huge. And I should say, like, our mission as Vermilion Growers, our official mission is to grow high quality produce, healthy people, and sustainable communities. So
Mhm.
those kind of three facets, there's a lot to unpack there, but that's our mission as a company. So we really do have big vision, and big goals, and I'd say, personally, I'm excited to be a part of this. This is something that's
Mhm.
obviously been a huge aspect of my life for almost a decade now. And really, the learning experiences that I've had and the relationships I've formed around the world with people in this industry has been amazing, honestly. Just yeah, it's very humbling, and I'm very proud of it, to have these connections, and to meet with people, and explore this with minds who have been in this industry for years, right? And there's so much expertise out there. It's just fascinating to be a part of it.
Yeah. What do you think is your proudest moment from working in this space?
Oh, that's a good question. My proudest moment, I'd say that there have been a few for sure. I was honored to receive the Engineers Geoscientist Manitoba Intern Award back in 2021, I believe it was, for my work in the industry and as an engineer in training at that time, which was pretty
Hmm.
amazing. I was really honored to receive that. And then, of course, when we actually opened the facility, that was in July of 2023, when we had our grand opening for our facility in Dauphin. That was a pretty proud moment as well. It was amazing to be there with the community, with so many supporters and champions in the industry. We had some of our design teams and consultants from around the world who came for that event as well, which was really cool to
Wow.
have all these people in one place, right? And so that was a really proud moment. I had the opportunity to host the event as well with our team, and yeah, just to see the excitement and kind of the wow moment that everybody was having.
Hmm.
That we had a point where we had our screens closed and it was all dark in the greenhouse, and during our grand opening, we opened everything up literally and had the light stream in, and then it lit up the whole space, and it was a really cool experience, and everybody got to have that moment together. So that was definitely a proud moment. And then, of course, recently when I did obtain my professional engineering certification, just personally and professionally for myself, that's
Yeah,
exciting.
you got it. Like you got it in an area that is not defined in Manitoba.
Yeah,
Like as a greenhouse design engineer, like that's when we graduate biosystems engineering, it's like, okay, your options now for becoming a professional engineer is you can go do environmental remediation, or
yeah.
you can work in water treatment or wastewater, but there's no real system set up in place for greenhouse engineer in
Hmm.
Manitoba. Obviously, because we don't really have much until now for what you've done. So I think what your team and everyone has done, and Lucky and everyone on Vermilion Growers. So I think that is definitely a huge moment to be proud of, especially since the Engineers Association accepted, all your experience, which of course they should, but
Yeah,
it's like a new type of engineer here.
yeah,
So it's great that they accepted everything and whatnot.
yeah. It's very validating. So that's definitely a proud thing for myself. Yeah.
Yeah, well, congratulations,
Thank
Cormac.
you.
I am really looking forward to working more with you and collaborating more with Vermilion growers. And really, I am looking forward to helping students from biosystems engineering in Manitoba get into greenhouse design engineer roles in the future and
Agreed.
building this industry. And I really love greenhouses for so many reasons, but one of the reason, and of course, food security is one of them. You know, one of the reasons is, and I'm hesitant to say this because people say, "Well, Trina, don't romanticize greenhouses like everyone does," and it is true. Like I know working in a greenhouse day to day as a laborer, head grower can be very stressful. I'm
Yeah.
definitely not going to undermine that at all, but the winters in Manitoba are so long and they are so cold
Yep.
and dark and whatnot. Like if we had these greenhouses
Yep.
downtown and it's like, okay, like here's an option, to
Yes.
do, you could have a couple different jobs. You could work in an office, or would you like to
Yes.
work in this really warm, nice area,
Yeah.
as a laborer, crop grower? I think there would be a lot of people who want to do that. They just don't know that those opportunities exist.
Yeah.
And, and two, when we say greenhouses here, like people think, oh, Shelmerdines, or they think of like, your garden center, and they think
Yes.
of a plastic or glass structure that has a bunch of house plants that, again, is closed during the summer. And they're like, oh, I don't really know closed during the winter, if there's a lot of opportunity. They don't understand, the average person, and especially Manitoba, doesn't understand what a commercial vegetable
Yeah.
greenhouse operation is, what it looks like, what it feels like. And I think that if they did, there would be a lot of interest in people working these jobs. I mean, of course, like they're hard, they're long hours, they're tough. And so, of course, there'd be challenges for that, but I'm sure there are solutions as well
Yeah.
for creating employment. But yeah, but we'll see. That's a big thing for me to say, because I know a bunch of people will be like, well, we've tried. The people in the area don't want these jobs. So, but so I'm going to leave my opinions there, because I know I'll get those comments after this podcast. But anyways, thank you so much for joining this the Greenhouse Success Stories interview. It's been great to interview you. Of course, your story, it resonates so much with me and my personal experience here. But I think all the listeners, across North America, are going to be kind of blown away by what you guys have had to do and what you've had to go through in order to get your greenhouse started. And yes, and it's definitely something that you should be very proud about. And thank you for joining this call.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Trina. I appreciate it.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Greenhouse Success Stories hosted by Trina Semenchuk. Thanks to our guests who make this all possible. Special thanks to our title sponsor, Arnois Greenhouse. To read the full show notes for each episode, which includes an episode summary, key takeaways, and guest resources mentioned, please visit greenhousesuccess.com.